This is gonna be good. This is Under the Classic Rock. I'm Bill Hemberger. Are they rock, jazz rock, fusion, R&B, blue-eyed soul, or did they come up with their own classic rock mold? You decide as I get into the cool chording of Steely Dan. Steely Dan, no static at all. This band grew out of a friendship between Donald Fagan and Walter Becker as they both were attending Bard College in New York. They dug the same jazz radio station, same jazz clubs, same jazz singers. Both were not turned on by any rock and pop acts except for the Beatles and some Motown. Top 40 radio was never listened to, but they wanted to play in rock bands and write rock pop songs.
That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I know. In 1968, Walter Becker met Donald Fagan as he volunteered to play bass in one of Fagan's Bard College rock bands. Fagan had 4 bands going at once, but as it turned out, Fagan's bass player was getting all the gigs, so Becker joined one of Fagan's bands as a guitar player instead.
A race of angels bound with one together.
After Bard College, Fagan and Becker took apartments in Brooklyn, New York, a floor apart from one another, and started writing songs so they could sell them to other artists and publishers. Crude demo tapes were made of those songs. In 1970, with a cassette tape in hand, the two song pluggers walked into the legendary Brill Building in New York. They had dreams of becoming big-time successful songwriters like Burt Bacharach, Carole King, or Lieber and Stoller, who previously had also walked into the most respected music publishing house in the U.S.
Hold my hand in the Android warehouse.
As it turned out, there was a big music convention going on outside of New York City, so there were no big-time publishers in the building, except for one. Kenny Vance with J&E Americans. He heard some of the early what was to become Steely Dan stuff and was impressed with the two. He offered them jobs as sidemen for J&E Americans.
This magic moment.
They played and recorded with J&E Americans for about a year. Through their networking at the Brill Building, their first song was recorded. Barbra Streisand recorded I Mean to Shine. Then the two got hooked up with producer Gary Katz, who was working in New York with Bobby Darin. When Katz got an offer from ABC Records in L.A., he accepted and took Fagan and Becker with him as staff writers. Katz started looking through the ABC talent roster to pick the most likely to record Fagan and Becker's material. Well, he soon discovered that the pair's compositions with their major chords were not going to fit bands like Three Dog Night.
Parker's band with a smooth style of syncopation.
Katz encouraged them to put their own band together. They did, and they named the band after a gas-powered dildo called a Steely Dan.
Oh yeah! Oh yeah!
The original Steely Dan band... All right, take 2. The original Steely Dan band, which did not last more than one album, was Becker on bass, Fagan on keyboards and vocals, Jeff Skunk Baxter and Denny Diaz on guitar, Jim Hodder on drums, David Palmer on a second keyboard and lead vocal. Palmer was brought in because Fagan had nasty stage fright and didn't think he would be able to pull off the live shows as a lead singer. Well, he obviously got rid of his stage fright. The first Steely Dan single was a tune called Dallas.
Dallas, I can't stay, should have been at the palace.
Fagan later called the song a real stinko, and it was left off the first album, which debuted in 1972. Can't Buy a Thrill produced 3 classic rock radio standards: Do It Again, Reelin' in the Years, and Dirty Work, with David Palmer handling the lead vocal. The album was a huge success, and the band was off doing live shows and TV shows with America's #1 DJ, Dick Clark.
He and Walter Becker took the name of their group from a reference made in a William Burroughs novel. Here is Steely Dan.
Steely Dan put out 2 more albums with a shuffling of the original lineup. Palmer was phased out when Fagan saw that he could handle all the lead vocal work.
I'm a fool to do your dirty work, oh yeah.
After the 3rd album, Pretzel Logic, Steely Dan stopped doing live shows. Fagan and Becker were always impressed with the Beatles, so they took another cue from them and became just a studio band. The record company was furious until they saw the sales figures. The audience didn't care. They were hooked on the Steely Dan Sound. From 1975's Katie Lied to Gaucho in 1980, Fagan and Becker used a slew of top-notch studio musicians to make their music.
Hey, Jean, when all my time dancing is through, I run to you.
Yes, Steely Dan was a rock/pop band, but they took their sophisticated harmony structures and recording techniques from old jazz records. They especially honed in on Blue Note record producer Rudy Van Gelder with his tight, clean sound, where every instrument could be defined. In 1981, after Gaucho was released amongst lawsuits and other non-music related shenanigans, Fagan and Becker split up. Becker went to grow avocados on Maui, and Fagan walked around his apartment writing more songs. He eventually put those songs to good use on his first solo effort called Nightfly. The two finally started working together again in 1986, helping with each other's solo projects, and they managed to sit and write together as well between 86 and 87. In 1993, MCA put out a collection of Steely Dan songs called Citizen Steely Dan and convinced Fagan and Becker to put a band together to promote the collection. They did. The shows were recorded for the 1995 CD Steely Dan Alive in America. After a brief tour, the duo's creative juices were gelling again, and they hit the studio with songs they had written in the late 80s and recorded Two Against Nature, their first album in 20 years. It not only was a huge sales success, but it pushed back their current fans and record industry on their heels. The album just kicked ass.
Another negative girl at the edge of the frame, deliciously toxic, original classic theme.
The album won 4 Grammys. Steely Dan was back, and they were doing live shows again.
Attention all shoppers.
They released another studio album in 2003. Everything Must Go was the last Steely Dan studio effort. As of 2017, they go out and do tours to make cash. According to Fagan, because of streaming services killing record sales, it's just not worth it financially to make new music. And some bad news, too. As I was finishing editing this Under the Classic Rock, got news that Walter Becker died at his home in Maui on September 3rd, 2017. Donald Fagan has announced that Steely Dan will still go on touring, just so he can honor his friend and colleague of so many years. Oh, man, that sucks. All right, Bill, you can continue again. Some true and false about Steely Dan before I pull the batteries out of this thing. True. Chevy Chase played drums for one of Fagan's band in college called the Leather Canaries. And false, Becker and Fagan's real names are not Tristan Fabrini or Gus Mahler. Those are the fake names they use when touring with Jay and the Americans. You can hear and download Under the Classic Rock on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, Player FM, and on iHeartRadio. And please, when you can, share this podcast with all your classic rock friends. I thank you for listening and downloading Under the Classic Rock, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right, let's take it from the top again.
Crude demo tapes. Wow.
Nice try, Charlie Brown.
Yeah, that was good. Everything must go. Yeah. Helping with what the hell? Helping with
You can do it.
helping with each other's solo projects. Yeah, that's better. They especially honed in on Blue Note record. They especially honed in on Blue Note record producer Randy.
Are you sure it's legal?
Did Russ let the children into the studio again?